She is the first woman to occupy that much coveted position of the chief economist out here at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And right now, we're actually in the midst of what is known as the annual meetings of the year for the International Monetary Fund. And it's a very important time, not just for India, but the world. Everyone's been talking about a global slowdown. And for more on that, we're going to be talking to Gita Gopinath. It's such a privilege. Simply put, for all of you out there watching, she is the authority when it comes to understanding the economic situation of India vis-a-vis the world. So Gita, let's just dive straight into it. I want to understand, to start with, everyone's been talking about a crisis, a rocky patch for India when it comes to economics. But how bad is it going to get? That's what everyone wants to know.
So we downgraded India's growth significantly for 2019 to 6.1%.
Yeah.
However, we are projecting a recovery back to 7% in 2020. So we think of this as a cyclical downturn.
Yeah.
India got hit on many fronts. I think there is the weakness in rural income growth.
Yeah.
There is the issues with the non-bank financial sector. There are regulatory uncertainties, and there's weakness in the auto sector and the retail and the real estate sector.
Yeah.
So these factors have all generated a weakness in the domestic economy, both on investment and in consumption.
Okay, so you're not too worried about what's going to happen next year. You believe that we're going to be back up, moving up from 6.1 to more than 7 perhaps.
So we have it up to 7% for next year, but that's was a 0.5 downward revision from our previous forecast. So
yeah.
It's a little less optimistic than we were a few months ago.
Absolutely.
About 2020. Now there are certain measures that have been taken that should help with the recovery and the monetary stimulus. There's been a significant amount of that. There's also been the recent corporate tax cuts.
Yeah.
There's been policies to help rural income growth. So all of those should help with a recovery.
All right. So I'm going to get back to that. I just want to actually ask you with something more topical. The demonetization paper that you came up with. You did something earlier, and that time you had actually kind of signaled a 2.0% effect on the GDP. But this time it's 2.2. It's increased according to your study that you've co-authored. So could you tell us a little bit about what was the basis of that revision in terms of the impact of demonetization?
What we calculated was that for the fourth quarter, in terms of the calendar year,
Correct.
for 2016,
Yeah.
growth was at least 2% lower, and this is on a quarter to the previous year quarter basis. So this is a significant effect
Yeah.
that we had
Then where
seen.
did that 2.2 come from?
I have no idea. This is the
my
first time I've
information.
heard.
All right. Okay, so you're saying it's still 2.0,
No, we
the
said-
impact
we
of
said
demonetization.
we said that it was at least 2.0, so it could be harder. It's hard to pin down the number. Another point we did make is that we do think that the effects were transitory, so that
Okay.
they went away somewhere in the middle of 2017.
Okay, so one of the aspects of what you were talking about, just like an answer back, was 6.1%, 7.2 to 6.1% the GDP estimation that was done by the RBI, the Indian government, etc. But what I wanted to ask you specifically about was that there are those who believe even that is an overestimation. Even you are estimating a similar situation for India, but is that also a bit of an overestimation, do you think?
I mean, these are the numbers we think will be what will play out.
Yeah.
There are obviously always risks to the outlook, and things can change. It's always a challenge measuring GDP in countries like India, where there's a big informal sector.
Yeah.
There's always more to be done on that front. But this is not just about India. This is about many countries in the world in terms of measurement. But these are the numbers we have at this point.
Okay. So talking about numbers, a number of people, including Arvind Subramaniam, have actually raised questions about the statistics that come out from the Indian government and the credibility of those numbers. What would you have to say about that?
I mean, India has taken serious steps to improve its measurement, but like I said, it's a complicated task. There is certainly room for more data collection to better measure the informal sector. There is still the work that needs to be done on deflators. And again, this is not just India specific. This applies to many countries. I mean, in our own work, we don't find any conclusive evidence of systematic bias in the numbers.
Oh, you don't? But so are you as confident as you always were about the credibility of the numbers that come out of India?
This is what I just said, which is that there's always room for doing more. And again, not just about India, but many other countries. There's certainly more scope for better data coverage. and for the kinds of techniques that are being used. But again, these are numbers that we have to work with.
All right. Okay. You were talking about corporate tax rates a short while back. What India really needs to do to get back on track, in a sense. What are the kind of reforms that you think, the structural reforms that India actually needs to implement immediately? And I know you've already spoken about that, but could you get more specific about that?
Yeah. So the monetary stimulus and the fiscal stimulus certainly has the ability to revive investment in India, but there is still more to be done. If you look at the banking sector, well, there's been an improvement on that front too, but still there is much more work to be done with non-performing loans. Corporate balance sheets have to be cleaned. But to make this a sustainable improvement, you really need to improve governance of these the public sector banks. So that's one very important piece of it.
Okay.
Then, of course, there is the rural income growth and the ability to be able to sustain income on that front. And some steps have been taken to improve regulatory certainty, but I think more needs to be done there. And then, of course, there are the structural reforms that India needs. It needs more infrastructure spending.
Where is that going to come from? Because you're talking about the banking sector, which is, well, feeling the pinch. And it is the banking sector which is the engine room when it comes to making sure that people get the money that they need to spend, and therefore the economy grows. So where is that going to come from?
So there's been some recapitalization of the banks. We are seeing some more pass-through of the monetary policy rate cuts to credit markets. So we hope that process will pick up. The government has, of course, announced an intention to do more infrastructure projects, and that is welcome. And then there also needs to be reforms done on labor markets and on land. And this is the beginning of a new term for the government, and with a lot of political capital. So it should be able to use that to undertake structural reforms. Okay,
right. Now, one of the biggest debates that Oxfam's behind it, Piketty's behind it, inequality has been rising in India. Where are you on cutting increasing taxes for the rich and the corporates? Where do you stand on that? What does India need to do?
I mean, there's no blanket simple prescription on that front. I think one has to pay close attention. Often what happens is that the governments spend a lot, but not well targeted, right? Okay. So sometimes the subsidies that used are not well targeted, and so you can improve not just the amount of spending, but the effectiveness of spending, and I would say that for many countries in the world. Inequality is a big issue, not just in India, but in other countries in the world.
But it's been rising in India more, and that is a worry. And so the question is, do you increase the taxes on the rich?
I think I think we should first think about the many other ways in which we can reduce inequality, which is through better education, better health for people in India, and more spending on that front can certainly help with reducing inequality. Rural incomes, that particular dimension also works. So there's a lot more that can be done that raises both overall growth for India and also brings in the lower end of society and helps them gain from it.
All right. Okay. Consumption demand is low. What does India need to do to reverse it?
The policies that I just highlighted over here. So yes, you're right. So consumption demand has softened. Investment has been weak. Okay. And in both those areas, if there is the monetary stimulus were to go into the system more strongly through more healthier banks, that would certainly help.
Okay. Climate change, pollution, there are things that are actually affecting the Indian economy. There are already rumors and murmurs and even news developments that are coming in about diplomats not wanting to come to India, for example, because of this, the pollution problem. How is that affecting the economy?
No, pollution is a real concern, and it affects the lives of people on a day-to-day basis. But more in other ways is that climate change is also leading to extreme weather conditions. You have droughts and you have floods, and that also has an impact on the economy. So this is a real present concern for India. India has set very ambitious targets with respect to mitigating the impact on climate. You've seen a decline in the amount of emissions as a share of GDP. So the emission intensity of GDP for India has come down. Okay. So it's made progress, quite significant progress in that front, and it has pretty ambitious goals. Also to switch towards less emission fuels,
Yes.
or less emission, energy.
Yeah.
And so it is making progress on that front. And I think many other countries in the world also need to do a lot more.
Yeah. But you also feel that, yes, it is impacting the economy, and therefore these plans are great, but they need to be implemented correctly as soon as possible also, yeah?
It is affecting many countries in the world.
Okay.
And if you think of some of the GDP revisions we've done for countries in the world, some of that is purely coming from natural disasters and weather-related disasters, yes.
Is India one of them? Is it natural disasters or climate or pollution been incorporated in your downgrading of India?
In the most recent numbers, the impact has not been about. For the 2019 numbers, I don't believe anything weather-related was a big part of it.
Okay. It's the biggest headline out here in the States. We're talking about the US-China trade ties. The trade war, does it help India?
Trade wars in general have negatively impact the globe as a whole, because what happens is you have this heightened uncertainty. With heightened uncertainty, you have low investment. With low investment, there's less demand for capital goods, and capital goods are a big part of international trade. And
Absolutely.
so international trade has slowed to the lowest level since 2012.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
You could ask about how does it affect India directly. I think it works more through confidence effects, through financial market sentiment effect, the negative rap that has. In terms of trade diversion, I think India could do a lot better in terms of being a destination for value chains, global value chains. It's not there yet, and so in that sense, I don't see much diversion happening towards India.
What does India need to do for that?
So, to be a big player in the global value chain space, you really need to have very nimble markets, in-time production. And that requires very strong infrastructure
Systems.
in terms of roads and transportation to ports, but also in terms of labor laws and in terms of the ability to acquire land.
All right. Okay. Final question for you. And what we've been learning is that you've talked about how this global slowdown is not going to be to the tune of what happened in 2008. You believe that. However, there's this declining role of the dollar. And keeping that in mind, are you still as confident as you have been about the global slowdown, that it's not going to hit the 2008 financial crisis levels?
No, we don't have anything like a 2008 recession in our baseline, either for 2019 or for 2020. There is still about a third of the global economy that's growing at over 5%. Right. When we start worrying is when growth gets to around 2.5% for the global economy, because that's when you have a bunch of countries that are entering recession. Okay. So we are far from that, and we are projecting an uptick to 3.4% for 2020. Now, again, we also mentioned that there are downside risks. There could be an escalation of trade tensions, an escalation of geopolitical tensions, and those could derail things. That
could derail. Okay, Gita, I have to ask you one final question, which is about negotiations out here with respect to India. Can you give us a sneak peek into something interesting that's happened already, is going to happen, that we could probably tell our viewers about?
The simple answer is no. I give no sneak peeks of any kind.
Well, I tried my best, and you saw that. Gita Gopinath, thank you so much for being here. That's appreciated. Thank you.